Welcome to The Healing Life. I'm Amanda. This podcast is for people committed to healing, not as a finish line, but as a way of living. Every episode, we talk honestly about what it actually looks like to keep choosing healing as life unfolds. When things get better, when they get harder, and when another layer shows up. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a conversation about one of my least favorite topics in the world. Forgiveness. I cannot tell you how much I hate the word forgiveness, how much I hate talking about forgiveness, how much I hate thinking about forgiveness. So I decided to do an episode on it, of course, because that makes sense. So let's jump into it. I have a bit of a hot take around forgiveness, and it is that I don't really believe in it. I don't think that forgiveness is necessary, and I have developed a way of thinking about forgiveness and what it accomplishes over the course of my life and with everything I've been through in my life. And I've finally arrived somewhere that I think works for me. So I'm going to share that with you today, but I'm also going to share views that counter mine because I think that's fair. And also, I'm a researcher, so I had to go down the rabbit hole on what forgiveness researchers have found and what they're saying in those spaces. So we're going to talk about my beliefs, but I'm also going to share what forgiveness researchers have to say. So let's go on a ride. I suppose it might help to give you some context as to why I despise the topic of forgiveness so much. And we have to go back to my childhood for that. And I've shared that I grew up in a cult and in a really abusive family. So growing up, forgiveness wasn't a choice. It was a theological mandate and a theological weapon. If you wanted God to forgive you so that you wouldn't burn in hell for eternity, you had to forgive others. No exceptions, did not matter what they did to you. You had to forgive them completely. And in that context, growing up, forgiveness meant absolution. It meant forgetting. It meant, to quote the Bible, as far as the east is from the west. That's how far you had to remove your heart from resentment toward the person who offended you. You had to be like God. And that framework was used against me pretty directly as a child to pressure me into forgiving the brother who raped me hundreds of times. And what that looked like for me growing up was that I had to act like it hadn't happened. I had to sit next to him at family dinners. I had to hug him and stand next to him in pictures. And I had to go about daily life living with the person who violated me in the most heinous ways, acting like this was someone very dear to my heart. And if I did not act like I had fully forgiven him and was completely reconciled with him, I was in a lot of trouble with my parents who knew about the rape and who enforced this forgiveness mandate in the family. In fact, my parents even made me go on a restitution trip with the rapist brother when I was in college to solidify the forgiveness and reconciliation. And that was horrible. It was so awkward and uncomfortable and horrifying, but it's what I had to do to demonstrate that I had fully forgiven my brother and that we were reconciled unto each other. Amen. Forgiveness was also a really significant, primary, immediate focus of the Christian counseling I went through after disclosing the sexual assault when I was a young adult in college. The message that just got hammered into my brain was forgive, forgive, forgive. We totally skipped the part where I sat with and grappled with and acknowledged the horror and grief and criminality of what had happened to me growing up. I think a lot of us experience a religious script around forgiveness that's very normalized in our culture, in the US at least, that pushes this idea that you must forgive Forgive and forget was a huge phrase I heard growing up. And even outside religion, the pressure to forgive is ubiquitous. Phrases like, but it's your family. You only have one mother, one father. It's your brother, it's your sister. You only have one family. Holding on to anger hurts you. All of these phrases sound so tender and important and like they're the glue that's holding society together, but they're actually, in reality, asking the person who was harmed to do the emotional labor of making everyone else feel comfortable about whatever harm occurred. And I think what we need to hear, what needs to be said, is that you're allowed to have boundaries with anyone at any time for any reason. You do not have to perform forgiveness to make people feel better. And so I think that part of the problem is how we conceptualize forgiveness as a culture. And this is where the research gets kind of interesting. So a 2020 paper by forgiveness researcher Malika Foray and colleagues defines forgiveness as a shift in motivation away from retaliation and avoidance towards increased goodwill for the perceived wrongdoer. And the standard cultural definition of forgiveness kind of mimics what I was saying earlier that we see in religion around this concept of absolution. Like, I forgive you gets heard as you're absolved. The slate is clean. We're okay. It's all good. For me, at least, absolution isn't mine to give. Like, I'm not God. And for survivors of significant harm, particularly, it can feel like forgiveness is a transaction that benefits the person who caused harm. But here's where the research actually distinguishes between types of forgiveness. According to Dr. Foray, there are two types of forgiveness. Decisional forgiveness, which is choosing to control your behavior by not retaliating, by being civil. And then there's emotional forgiveness, which is actually setting aside resentment and cultivating positive feelings toward the person who hurt you. So they're not the same thing. And Dr. Foray describes emotional forgiveness as requiring three distinct components. First is cognitive control, which means you're able to override your impulse to retaliate. Second is perspective taking, which means genuinely understanding the wrongdoer's intentions and mental state. And then third and finally, social valuation, which means you calculate the future value of your relationship with the person who harmed you, and then you make decisions accordingly. So for me, as a survivor of, deliberate, repeated childhood sexual assault, for instance, that cognitive and emotional load can feel enormous. And the research itself shows that people are significantly less likely to forgive intentional harm than accidental harm. So that's not a personal failing. It's the brain responding appropriately to what has actually taken place. I think that most of what we're culturally pressured into is performing both decisional and emotional forgiveness across all contexts. So we're expected to control our behavior, be civil, show up to family dinners, and offer the transgressor emotional warmth and goodwill. And I think that's where the conversation around forgiveness gets messy. Because there's that kind of societal expectation that not only are we going to control our behavior, not retaliate and be civil, but we're also, in all cases, going to offer warmth and goodwill toward the offender. And that is not always appropriate. That is not always the right thing to do. Sometimes you just need to do one. Sometimes you just need to offer decisional forgiveness where you choose not to retaliate. You control your own behavior. Sometimes that is enough. Over a decade ago, a former mentor told me that their definition for forgiveness is giving up the hope of a better past. And that helped me a bit at the time. I think it gave me permission to stay on the path I was already on and kind of lean into this like, hey, I don't have to offer goodwill and warmth to everyone in every circumstance. But what I found in the decade plus since I heard that phrase is that it still falls short. For me, it's still a bit passive and backward facing. Personally, I need something I can do in the here and now that feels tangible and accessible. So this is where another researcher helped me clarify some important things around forgiveness. Dr. Amrisha Vaish studies what happens between victims and transgressors and what matters when we decide to either repair a relationship or move on. And what she found is that remorse is what matters. By the age of 5, children are already looking for remorse as a signal that the other person recognizes what they did was wrong and wants to maintain the relationship. Apology and remorse signals that the other person recognizes your humanity and wants the relationship to continue too. So remorse and repair are about the relationship. And this is where my hot take really comes into play. I don't believe in forgiveness, probably because of how I was programmed to see it and understand it growing up, and how I was forced to perform it in a way that was so unsafe and so unhealthy. And I might never get over my hang up with the word forgiveness. And that's okay if that is actually what happens. But how I've come to view healing and moving through hurt is by framing it as acceptance instead of forgiveness. For me, I found that I can accept what happened fully, completely, no pretense, regardless of whether the other person ever shows remorse. I don't need their apology to accept the reality of what occurred. I don't need their remorse to put down my own pain. My pain is mine to hold and release on my timeline as I process through, heal, come to accept, and finally feel ready to put down what the other person did to me. Acceptance for me is concrete. It's present. It's active. It's not about the past. It's acknowledging what's real, what happened, what is historical fact, what I lived through, which scars I carry, and never pretending otherwise. Acceptance doesn't require the other person to do anything, including show remorse. It doesn't require a conversation. It doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't require being in relationship or contact with that person. Acceptance is entirely mine. I once heard Taylor Swift say in an interview that she saves real forgiveness and reconciliation for people who are close to her and who are safe to her, and everyone else she just moves on from. And that really landed for me because it matched what I was already finding to be true within myself. Sometimes deciding not to retaliate is enough. Sometimes moving on is enough. Sometimes accepting the reality of what happened and having boundaries accordingly is enough. I think it's really important to recognize that acceptance of the event is not the same thing as acceptance of the person. So you can accept that something happened without accepting the person who did it back into your life. I accept what my brother did. It happened. It's real. It had a profound impact on me. I do not accept him. They're two completely separate decisions, and I get to make them. Acceptance of an event is not absolution of a person. It's not reconciliation. It's not opening that door. Acceptance is acknowledgement of the event. It's honoring what you went through. It's grieving what you went through. It's taking the time to process it and arriving at a place where you feel like, okay, I can put this down now and I can move forward. And there is relief in that. For me, at least, I find that there's safety and empowerment and health in that. And I think having this view of acceptance versus forgiveness also applies to how people interact with me when I hurt them. So I don't expect people to absolve me of what I did. That's mine to own. My job is to show remorse and to make healthy, good faith attempts at repair. And at that point, it's on the other person to decide if they can accept the hurt I caused, accept my remorse and my attempts to repair, and accept me. I spent decades wrapped up in this concept of forgiveness that pushed reconciliation and feelings of goodwill and warmth toward people who enacted just enormous malicious harm toward me. I lived so many of those years in shame because I couldn't do it. I was so focused on like trying to perform this emotional forgiveness that really got in the way of me actually processing what I'd lived through and getting to a place where I could accept it and say, okay, this is real. It is historical fact. I have honored the pain. I have grieved it. I have learned from it. And now I am ready to put it down and move forward with my life. And somewhere along the line, I just decided that for me, maybe it's specific to me and my traumas, but I decided I don't need to forgive. That was slowing me down in my healing. And I'm a researcher. I love research, but I'm also a pragmatist. And I think there are some things that work really well in an experiment and produce awesome results in a clinical environment that don't necessarily work out in the wild all the time. It's really interesting to see the brain scans Dr. Ferre's team produced. I think that the study is really interesting. And I'm going to go on a little bit of a deeper dive to look at the internal and external validity. But I think it's also important to remember that we're each on our own path. We're going at our own pace, and we don't need to feel pressured to perform something that we're not genuinely feeling. And this could definitely change at some point in my life. I don't hold myself to a stagnant standard that this is my stance and shall therefore always be. I don't want to be a stagnant person. I want to be dynamic. I want my beliefs to change if and when they should. So it might, but for now, I'm really not focused on or concerned with forgiveness. I accept what happens. I repair with the people who truly matter to me. And for now, that's enough. I think I've found a lot more peace in my life and healing in my life by putting down societal and cultural norms around forgiveness. I'm not going to forget the people who maliciously harmed me. I'm not going to forget what they did. That would be colossally dumb, in my opinion. Now, when my spouse loads the dishwasher in a way that pisses me off, that's something I'm going to just accept and process very quickly, because that's someone who's important to me. That's someone who's close to me. That's someone who demonstrates safety in their relationship with me. So don't get me wrong. I absolutely do believe that there are times when we need to process through things pretty quickly because it's an important relationship. It's not that, devastatingly harmful, and it's someone safe and close to us, and we need to move through that repair quickly. There are absolutely moments when quick repair or forgiveness, I hate that word so much, but you know what I mean, is warranted. So I'm not arguing against that at all. But I am arguing that for significant harms, we don't need to perform forgiveness. We can have boundaries with anyone at any time for any reason. Forgiveness does not need to be the first priority when we are harmed. Honoring the experience, grieving the experience, processing the experience are significant undertakings. that require a lot of energy, and I would advise processing that first. Because when we have come to terms with those hurts, when we have accepted historical facts, when we have grieved, it's not a performance to put those things down. It's just the next thing you do. I think I can honestly say that while I don't have warm feelings toward my brother, I also don't wish him harm. I just don't think of him. He doesn't factor in my existence. And I think that's a perfectly acceptable alternative to warmth and goodwill. Now, maybe they'll scan my brain and realize that, if I had warmth and goodwill, my brain would look better. But this is something I personally can live with. So if you're anything like me and forgiveness is something that keeps you up in the middle of the night, it is the F word. It's a terribly uncomfortable and intimidating topic. I hope this reframe as acceptance, neutrality, not thinking of the person anymore is a viable solution for you. I have found it gives me a lot of peace. It's reduced a lot of anxiety, and it's something that just comes a lot more naturally as I progress through my healing than performing forgiveness ever did. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take what you need, leave the rest, and keep moving in the direction of your healing. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who needs it. That's how we all find each other. Subscribe to The Healing Life wherever you listen, and I'll see you in the next episode as the journey continues.